I'm Anna Urban, and this is the Wildly Different podcast. I'm going to talk about all the wildly different takes out there on ADHD, neurodivergence, spirituality, manifestation, the meaning of life, trauma, shame, joy, purpose, and of course, all the actionable, practical strategies from the super scientific to the super esoteric. Some episodes will leave you with more questions than answers, but that's exactly the point. Is ADHD a disorder or a gift? Are we here to hack our time or maybe even to reimagine what productivity looks like entirely? How do we get ourselves to do the things we say we're going to do, even when every cell in our body would rather do something else? Are we neurodivergent, or are we aliens from Atlantis sent here to evolve humanity? Are supplements a scam? What's the deal with ADHD meds, and why do we have so much drama about it? If any of these questions resonate with you, then you've come to the right place. Let's get untamed. Hello, my wild humans. Welcome back to the Wildly Different podcast. Every single week, we dive deep into strategies, mindset shifts, and tools to help us own our unique ADHD brains and create a more magical human experience. We take the theory, we take the science, and even the flowery, poetic language, and we make it tangible. Speaking of poetic and flowery advice, about 9 months ago, I discovered the concept of shadow work. And I've been absolutely obsessed with it ever since. Shadow work has transformed the way that I understand myself. And ever since I started applying these insights into my coaching program, ADHD Untamed, the transformations have been unbelievable. Here's what one of my members, Laura, just shared yesterday. I had no idea that this was going to blow up my mind. I had no idea that there was more data that I hadn't uncovered. In all the years of therapy and self-help, personal growth, and spiritual growth I've worked on that I didn't already know about. One word, helplessness, cracked open decades of living a lie and taught behavior that I turned into a hardcore belief, and it has been my operating system since I was a child. It gives me back my I can versus what I believed for so long, the I can't. It gives me back possibilities instead of no way. This all from one video that I shared in Untamed about learned helplessness and how sometimes we make helpless and hot mess our identity without even realizing it. That is how ingrained our shadow is. Shadow work is the process of exploring the hidden parts of ourselves, the unconscious aspects, our repressed emotions, our fears, and those pieces that we often keep tucked away so that no one can see. Think of it like this. Our conscious self is the part that we show to the world. And our shadow is everything beneath that surface that influences us, often without our awareness. The goal of shadow work is to integrate these two sides so that we can become more whole, more authentic, more aligned. Basically, like if you have nothing to hide, like if you fully own and embody yourself, then what is there left to fear? Like if you have nothing to hide, then how will you ever be an imposter? That is the whole point of shadow work. Like the only reason that we feel like an imposter is when we feel like we have something to hide, right? Or the only reason why we struggle with perfectionism is because we don't want people to know that we're not perfect. So that is the whole point of shadow work, is like to bring forth these aspects of ourselves that are unconsciously sabotaging us. So shadow work is so powerful because it doesn't dance around, it gets right to the root. One really powerful realization that I had about shadow work is, okay, we spend all of this time and energy and money regulating our nervous system, right? Maybe we meditate to clear our mind. We exercise to get the frustration out. I mean, we exercise for lots of different reasons, but there are so many of us that exercise to regulate ourselves and I mean, my husband is an example of this, and he has shared this publicly before. He would exercise, and if he doesn't exercise, then he's like, oh my gosh, like I'm such a mess, like I'm so dysregulated. And it's like, why is that, right? Why is that? We exercise to get our frustration out. We go to Reiki, we journal, we pray for patience and calm. But often the part that we keep skipping out on is understanding, why am I dysregulated in the first place? Why am I dysregulated in the first place? Why am I so triggered by my kids, by my boss, by my spouse, right? Why do I need to meditate, exercise in order to think straight. I'm not saying that these things aren't important. There's a duality here, there's a nuance. But our methods of regulating ourselves are so much more powerful when we're not just playing catch up all the time. Like when we understand why we're dysregulated in the first place, and it doesn't dysregulate us to such an extreme extent, right? So the point of this is, rather than just treating the symptoms, let's go straight to the wound. So I just want to make a huge disclaimer here that, like, I'm not a shadow work expert. I'm not a Jungian psychologist. I am just your average gal. I'm an ADHD coach. I have a master's in education, and I'm committed to learning more and more about it every day, because I've seen this be so transformative. Even if you're just scratching the surface with shadow work, it's so powerful. And I'm so excited to share some of what I've discovered with you. So last week, we talked about the mantra, energy flows where intention goes, and how specific actionable goals can build clarity and sustainable momentum. And today, I want to take that one step further by unpacking another esoteric mantra, as above, so below. Right? You may have heard this phrase in ancient texts like the Kabbalion, or even in biblical references. At its core, as above, so below speaks to the interconnectedness between different levels of existence. It suggests that there's this dynamic relationship between the macrocosm, right, the vast cosmic order, the universe, God, and the microcosm, right, the individual, the earthly realm. But you can also apply this metaphorically to shadow work, in that it invites us to consider that the different parts of our being, our conscious identity, and our hidden unconscious self are deeply interconnected. So our conscious identity, or our ego, is the above, right? And then our shadow, the parts that we're trying to hide, suppress, is the below. And so we cannot escape the shadow. It's going to pop up always. It's like trying to keep a beach ball underwater. Have you ever tried to keep a beach ball underwater? The second that you let go, it pops up, right? And so this is where, if we're unaware, and we get triggered by something, we let go of our defensive, and that's when the beach ball pops up. And that's why when you're trying to hide something, and somebody like asks you a question about it, or pokes a wound, you're like, what are you talking about? Right? You might snap, or you might get defensive, or you might resort to blaming or shaming or whatever it is. We do this with other people, and we do this with ourselves. But so the point is, as above, so below means things don't stay hidden for very long. Right? As above, so below means bringing forth, like embodying, integrating the parts of our shadow can actually allow us to be the person that we want to be, right? So rather than saying like our outer life is simply a reflection of our inner world, it's more about recognizing that our internal experiences and the external life that we navigate are part of a whole. It's not like you're all ego or you're all shadow. You're all, always, everything, all at once, right? You cannot get rid of the shadow. It's about integrating it. It's about accepting it, right? Going back to, if you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing to fear, right? It's creating that more harmonious balance between these two realms, the yin and the yang, right? This is why I love talking about shadow work. Because even when we've done the work of making a goal tangible, which I talked about in the last episode, of specifically outlining, the action steps, of tracking our time, of turning, projects into tasks, all that good stuff. Even when we've done all of those things, a lot of us still end up not following through. Or maybe we follow through for a couple days or a week or two, and then we revert back. Right? And we use that as evidence of how we're not good enough, or again, it's confirming our shadow, right? But if you look deeper, you can see that there are aspects of ourselves that we haven't yet integrated it. And that's the reason that we keep getting derailed. Okay, so enough frou-frou talk, enough like philosophical stuff. Let's make this tangible. I want to give you an example of a realistic goal that you can set for yourself and how the shadow may come up and try to derail it. So here's one about self-talk. Self-talk is something that a lot of us are aware of. Like, we're aware of our negative self-talk, especially if you've done the work of, personal development, therapy, somatic experiencing, the whole thing, we understand like, all right, I need to be kinder to myself. It's that self-talk that's really derailing me. But so you might set a goal like, my goal is to give myself the same grace and kindness that I would extend to others. And this is important to me because there's so many ripples effects. Like if I can let go of self-criticism and embody self-compassion, it allows me to be more adaptable when plans change. It allows me to, preserve my mental energy for what truly matters, right? There's so many beautiful reasons for why practicing self-talk is so effective. And so maybe you outline a plan, right, for practicing self-talk. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause and say one kind thing to myself every day, especially when plans go awry, right? I'll say something like, you're doing your best right now. Maybe you have like a mantra. Maybe you use a visual reminder, like a sticky note on your desk or your phone wallpaper. It has a supportive phrase, right? Maybe you spend 5 minutes at the end of the day listing out what went well, even if it's small. And then maybe you schedule a non-negotiable 30 minutes for something you enjoy once a week, right? Maybe something like coffee with friends or a hike, a solo hike, right? But this is non-negotiable. You make a plan to do all these things, right? And then you continue to prioritize breath work and grounding techniques when you feel overwhelmed. Okay, this is a beautiful goal. This is a beautiful goal. And like I said, most people really struggle with negative self-talk. It takes a long time for a lot of us to realize that we don't need to be more productive, right? We don't need to make more money. We don't need to hit every single milestone of some endless checklist. The real issue is our self-talk. It's how we feel about ourselves. Because no matter how much success you achieve, if you're unkind to yourself, it will never be enough. We know these things. We know these things logically. We understand them, right? And so this goal shifts the focus to the things that will move the needle, right? Having grace and kindness, practicing the pause, right? It's letting go of the self-criticism. I love how specific and actionable this goal is. However, as beautiful as it is, if we have aspects of ourselves, our shadow, that we aren't aware of or haven't integrated yet, here's what's likely to happen. Do you remember that plan of when plans go awry, I'm going to say a kind thing to myself, and just remind myself that I am good and whole and I'm trying my best, okay? When plans go awry, instead of pausing to say something kind to yourself, you start coming up with excuses. Like you start either blaming yourself, blaming and shaming yourself, or blaming and shaming other people, right? Well, I wouldn't be in this situation if so-and-so hadn't done X, Y, and Z. Or, yeah, I promised to be kind to myself, but this was like a really bad mess up. Like this was really, really bad, right? Like I should not have done this, right? It's like now all of a sudden we're coming up with reasons to not follow through on that plan. That inner critic is fueled by the unacknowledged shadow belief, which is that you're not allowed to mess up, right? You're not allowed to mess up. And so anytime you go to practice kindness, you reject that very practice that could help you grow. Another way that the shadow could show up is you start to dismiss the visual reminders, right? With an unintegrated shadow. Visual cues, sticky notes will feel like corny, or they will start to fade into the background, or you'll look at it and you'll roll your eyes, right? The shadow remains unintegrated, and those visual reminders become points of contention. Like you even start to resent them, right? You might dismiss them because it's like deep down, you're still clinging to the belief that you don't really deserve that extra level of care, right? They become a reminder of the gap between who you aspire to be and who you secretly believe you are. Or you might think yeah, that mantra is for other people, not for me, is what you're subconsciously saying. Like everybody else deserves kindness except for me, right? The other thing is reflecting for 5 minutes a day on what went well is a really simple, really powerful practice to shift your focus towards gratitude, towards positivity. But if you're struggling with an unintegrated shadow, it's way too easy for that practice to get pushed aside, right? When frustration and self-criticism take over. There's the overwhelming feelings of disappointment or failure that, again, are often rooted in your shadow that can make you feel like nothing went well at all. So you skip the reflection altogether. It's not a priority. If your shadow doesn't think it's a priority, it's not a priority, right? In doing so, you miss out on celebrating those small wins that could otherwise reinforce a healthier, more positive self-image. This is where the shadow gets really sneaky. It's aware, it doesn't want to be aware of the things that you're doing well. It's only concerned with how you're fucking up, right? So it will undermine your joyful moments. So remember the plan to schedule 30 minutes for something you enjoy. Well, it's going to be hard to follow through on that if you feel like you don't deserve it, right? What we're doing is we're trying to convince ourselves, no, I do deserve joy. But with this unintegrated shadow, it doesn't matter if logically we think it, if we don't actually feel it, this time is going to be easily sacrificed. It's going to get the chopping block, right? You might find yourself justifying the sacrifice by saying, well, I just have too much to do. Or I didn't really get enough done this week. So I shouldn't, enjoy watching this movie or whatever it is, right? There's this internal narrative, this deep-seated feeling of unworthiness that sabotages your ability to prioritize joy and self-care. So in each of these examples, the shadow is at work, quietly but powerfully undermining all of your plans because the belief that you're not enough is still there, right? When we're unaware of these hidden forces, our best laid plans crumble. It crumbles under the weight of internalized self-doubt, of unresolved emotions. We may think we're simply falling short because of a lack of discipline or a lack of motivation, but often it's the unintegrated parts of ourselves that steer us off course. There's another aspect of this too that's even more uncomfortable. Is there an identity of I am only myself when I am frazzled? Or do you have this identity of, because it's not always the shadow that's at play here. Sometimes it's the ego that's reinforcing this belief of like, I'm always frazzled or I'm a hot mess, right? Like, do we cling to this identity of like, I'm a hot mess? Because this could also be an aspect of even our identity. It's not even our shadow. Like, we own it. We own the fact that we're a hot mess. And so this keeps us from taking aligned action. Right? This is where the practice of shadow work is so crucial because it brings these hidden aspects into our awareness. By recognizing the excuses, the dismissals, the self-sabotaging patterns, we can start to heal the gap between who we aspire to be and that critical inner voice that says otherwise. Right? With time, as we work on integrating our shadows, these obstacles begin to dissolve, right? That kind word that you say to yourself in a moment of frustration becomes more natural. The visual reminders no longer feel forced, but they serve as gentle cues of your commitment to self-kindness, right? It's not corny, it's empowering. And the time that you set aside for reflection and joy, you actually follow through on because it's a celebration of your progress. When we learn to see and work with our shadow, we unlock a powerful truth that our inner world and our outer world is intertwined. As above, so below, as below, so above, right? By aligning them, we not only follow through on our plans, but we create a foundation that's more lasting, more transformative. So I want to bring you to another aspect of shadow or a way to clue you in on what your shadows are, which are known as projections. So I'm telling you, your brain is very sneaky, very, very sneaky. Shadow work is all about curiosity and actually less about action. It's more about patience and less about doing, right? So the patience to look for our patterns instead of dismissing them. So if this hasn't become quite clear to you yet, I want you to look at your shadows through a different lens, right? A really good way to understand our shadow is by examining our projections, which are basically like the qualities that we judge in other people, the qualities that we judge or criticize in others. So when we notice strong reactions or judgments towards someone else, this is often a clue of those traits that we have disowned or not fully integrated, right? So this process can help us identify the parts of our shadow that we need to explore and heal. So here's an exercise for you. Let's say there's someone in your life who really gets under your skin. Try to picture them in your mind right now. Picture who that person is. You know who I'm talking about, right? Picture that person in your mind right now. Somebody that like just really
grinds your gears, right? Now imagine that they shared with you that their goal is to practice daily self-kindness, right? They want to practice daily self-kindness. They're going to practice this by pausing to say one kind thing to themselves every time plans go awry. They're planning to spend 5 minutes each day listing what went well. They're planning to take weekly time for themselves. It's your exact goal, okay? It's your exact goal, your exact plan. They're sharing it with you. What are you thinking to yourself right now? What are you thinking to yourself about that person? Right? Everybody has shadows, so these might not all land with you, but it is important to really reflect on them rather than just dismiss them outright. Are you thinking, oh my God, they're so lazy? Or, oh my God, they're so annoying, right? Maybe you secretly feel like they're not putting in enough effort in getting stuff done, right? What is it about them that challenges you, that triggers you? Maybe you think like, oh my God, they're so emotional, Jesus Christ, right? Like, they're so dramatic, right? Like the things that we project onto others are actually things that we feel about ourselves. The things we project onto others are actually things we feel about ourselves. And so if you feel undeserving of, like a weekly hour to go for a hike, and you're not sure why that is, look at why other people piss you off. Like, look at the reasons that you feel like other people are undeserving, right? And that'll point you to one of your shadows. Their life must be so easy if they can afford to spend time on self-kindness, right? This thought could be masking your own feelings of struggle or inadequacy, right? Like, you could be saying, I'm not as resilient or as capable as they are. Or what about, they're just doing this for attention. Oh my God, they're just doing this for attention, right? In reality, you might feel like your need for validation and for kindness is actually attention seeking, right? And if you were taught to suppress seeking attention as a child, as an adolescent, well, then that's going to be suppressed into your shadow. And so maybe the reason that you have a hard time being kind to yourself is because it was seen as like attention seeking behavior, right? And so you suppress that, right? Or maybe you think about that person like they don't have any real problems, right? They can just choose to be kind to themselves. This might be an internal judgment that your challenges are insurmountable, right? Or that you're undeserving of the same kindness because, you don't mess up the way that other people mess up. Like when you mess up, like it's really big. Like, and maybe you feel that way about that other person, right? There's lots of other ways that these people can trigger us into exploring the parts of ourselves that we have disowned, right? Like maybe you think like that person's such a bitch. Well, what about them makes them bitchy, right? Like how does that actually apply to you, right? So this thought can serve as a defense mechanism. Whenever we're projecting onto other people and we're triggered by somebody, it's because it's pointing us to something that we haven't quite owned in ourselves, right? The very thought of a person like this, somebody that bothers us, being consistently kind to themselves might trigger an uncomfortable realization that deep down, you struggle with giving yourself that same grace because you secretly believe these things about yourself. Like you're lazy, you're dramatic, you are too soft, you're indulgent, whatever it is, right? And you acknowledge that in somebody else, and that allows you to see that in yourself. So when you feel that irritation, that judgment towards someone, it's worth asking yourself, like, what is it about their behavior that really bothers me? And how am I suppressing those behaviors in myself, right? Often the qualities that we criticize in others are the very ones that we find hardest to accept in ourselves. Thank you for taking this deep dive with me today. Remember, acknowledging your shadow is not about self-blame. It's about self-discovery and growth. Anytime you have gone into blame and shame, you're not doing shadow work. Shadow work is about curiosity. It's about acceptance. It's about willingness and compassion. If you are in shame and blame, you're not actually doing shadow work. If you are in shame and blame, you're not actually doing shadow work. In shadow work, in integrating the hidden aspects of yourself, there is no one to shame and no one to blame. I am so excited to hear more about your journey and hear how you're applying these strategies, I would love, 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 love for you to shoot me an email, anna@annaurban.com, or to hit me up on Instagram, AnnaUrbanUntamed, and let me know what stuck out to you in this episode, right? What about this really struck a nerve? And I'll see you on the wild side.